Good morning, Baker 501 students. It is Sunday, January 7th, 2024. Kind of hard to say that 2024. It just seems like not that long ago we were just turning the century. But nonetheless, good job with the forum discussion post. The one thing I do want to remind you guys, I'll remind you this week individually too, is I want you to do this as a video or audio post. I know some people are kind of typing replies back. But for this course, getting to know you a little bit better and also to give you just a different skill set, a different way to interact with each other. I do want you this week going forward, make sure to do it as a video or audio post. So some things to think about this week. Make sure to wrap up with whatever you have in week one. With the McGraw-Hill Connect, I've seen that people have been able to get in there and do that, so that's great. Also, the interactive vocabulary quizzes, and if you need to wrap up any forum discussion post via audio or video, please do so. Now, looking ahead to week two, what I would suggest is also make sure, don't forget about your draft that's due in week 5. So you need to start lining up who you want to interview. Start working on that draft about potential sources. Definitely your book is going to be one of the sources, but there might be other outside sources. But what other examples can your book can you write about, especially in that early part of the paper? That way you can have something ready to go by week 5, and I can give you some good feedback. Because one of the purposes of this course is kind of try to help you ease into that graduate level writing. And you make sure to utilize things like Purdue OWL for the APA. At least at a minimum, you're going to have one resource for this course, and I want you to use your textbook, but hopefully you'll have some others, and that way you get some practice about doing in-text citations and also a reference page in APA format. So with that, thinking about this past week, the markets are kind of up and down. We're kind of adjusting right now, and some of you alluded that to your forum post. So it's still anticipated there's going to be rate cuts coming up in 2024, but a question of how quickly. I know the jobs report came out; it was still pretty strong, so the Fed's going to read into that a little bit. Whether they want to do any rate cuts, they probably don't want to move too quickly if they're concerned that the economy is heating back up. Good news, at least from gasoline prices that I've noticed. It's kind of interesting to me because I live in Kansas City. I work during Lynn, Missouri during the week. And this week, for whatever reason, it was finally reversed. It always seems to be cheaper in Kansas City in gas. When I get to Lynn, it's always 20 cents higher. And I ask the people in the town, well, why is it higher in this town? And nobody can tell me. But it's interesting. That's actually something we'll talk about in markets later, about regional markets and how it can be totally different. And there's nothing due to cost. But sometimes it can lead to what we call implicit collusion, that the 3 gas stations in town just kind of implicitly agree that this is the price that we're charging, and they just kind of watch each other, and they'll call up to corporate and they'll say, where should we set the price at? So, all right. So, the 2 main chapters we look at is chapter 3 and chapter 35 this week. Chapter 3 is like the meat and potatoes of economics, is what we call supply and demand analysis. So you're first going to look at what's called the circular flow diagram. And if you kind of think about the two sides that we have there, one, I like to think of us as individuals. We go to work every day. We produce goods and services. But in producing those goods and services, we also go to different markets, say with the shopping mall, grocery store, a lot more like Amazon or online now, where we buy those goods and services. So we do both sides, but we interact in those models. And a lot of times that model, you also have government that will provide regulation or intervention in those markets. But a lot of it follows, the flow of those goods and services and also the flow of the monies that provide those goods and services. So with demand, I want you to think this is an inverse or negative relationship. And, I could ask each person in this cohort, hey, how many, let's say, Cokes would you buy per year at a price of 50 cents, at $1, at $2, and at some point you say, hey, at $3 and $4, I won't buy any Coke. So I could sum up all these individual demand curves for Coke, and I could come up with what we'd call a market demand curve. We expect that to be a downward sloping negative relationship market demand curve. And some main terms I want you to understand with this is that if it's a movement along the demand curve, that's just a change in quantity demanded. But if it's a factor other than price, that's what we call a change in demand. And I would suggest for this week, even if we were a forum discussion post, to go out there and look at supply and demand articles. You could also look about international trade. But every day, if you go out to CNN Money, there's always something about supply and demand changing in markets. For example, if there is a surge, well, let's use Oprah. I used to like Oprah a lot with examples because she would say certain things about, hey, read this book. If she suggests read this book, the demand curve for that book shifted way out. The author could be a millionaire overnight. And it was a actual change in demand, a factor other than price, as we call like taste and preferences. But other factors that could shift that curve could be taxes and subsidies. It could also be anything that's going to lead to complementary goods. That means two goods that coexist together. So if SUVs or those Ford Broncos or Jeeps get really popular, they don't get the best mileage. Well, it could be if gasoline gets really expensive, that could also affect the demand for those Jeeps and the Broncos. But you're going to read about all these different things that can shift that demand curve. And it's the intersection of those two graphs, supply and demand, where we see the prices in markets change and the quantity together, demand and supply in markets change. So if things become unpopular, that demand curve could shift in. So I love to watch Chiefs. If you get an opportunity this afternoon, you watch the Chiefs game. But Chiefs are still winning. But if they start having bad seasons, and okay, yeah, there's the Taylor Swift effect. If she's at the game, the demand curve for the tickets can actually shift out by the Swifties. I'm sorry, the Swifties. Yes. So, but it's interesting to follow these things in markets and why do these things change? Well, on the supply side, the nice thing is that the rules still apply. If it's a movement along the supply curve, and supply curves are positive or direct relationships, the idea being that, hey, if you're willing to pay for the product and I have business expenses, and those expenses are going to go up, I will supply more to the market. Okay. Demand on the other side, as things get more expensive, price gets more expensive, the quantity of demand goes down. So that's the opposite with supply. And again, a movement along the supply curve deals specifically with price, but if there's a factor other than price, that can shift the supply curve in or out. So factors that shift the supply curve could be, again, taxes and subsidies. It could be expectations. It could be natural disasters. So say that I think we're supposed to get some bad weather this coming week, but let's say it hits Florida really hard and just destroys all the oranges down there. Well, in that case, we'd see a shift in supply to the left of oranges, and then we expect if we go to the grocery store, because of that shift, we're going to see a higher price for orange juice and less orange juice on the shelf. So again, the intersection of these things is what we call equilibriums in market. The last part of that chapter is going to talk about price floors and price ceilings. So with a ceiling, it says, hey, you can't charge any more than this price. Examples are rent controls in certain cities and price floors. I know in Missouri, like a good example is minimum wage. I think it just went up to $12.15. It says you cannot pay below this. But sometimes governments will intervene in these markets to set these price floors and ceilings. And, if it's say like the most you could charge for a one-bedroom apartment in Overland Park is $5,000, well, if the equilibrium's at like $1,500, it doesn't really matter. But if Overland Park said, hey, the most you can charge is $1,000, that'd probably bring about a problem because not a lot of people are going to willing to supply apartments at $1,000, and then you would actually end up having a shortage in that market. So same thing with potential unemployment in the market. If you set the minimum wage too high, then what's going to happen is employers are going to cut back, and they're like, well, I'm not meeting my opportunity cost. And although the government's trying to help out, you actually create more unemployment markets. So that's a lot of times what we call like a government failure. When the government intervenes in a market to try to make things better off, but they can actually make things worse off. Okay? Last chapter, chapter 35, you're going to look at international trade. You got to remember, without international trade, we would not have all the goods and services that we enjoy in the United States today. Unfortunately, my son over the weekend, my economics example drove me nuts. He went out and we went to this like $20. He wrestles, so he wanted this $20 water bottle from Walmart, and I asked the wife, "Why are we spending $20 on this water bottle?" I think it was called a Circu or something like that, but I went to bought it for him. He's a wrestler, and if it made him happy, we talk about utility theory. But I'm thinking, okay, could you just get the like a $1 water bottle? But there's something special about this water bottle, and you can add flavors to it. But it maximized his utility for the wrestling tournament. So, and he paid for it too. So, but I was just trying to give an example. Like, is this really a good idea to be rational to spend $20 on a water bottle? But nonetheless, um, we allow those nations that can produce those goods at the lowest opportunity cost to do so. And that's what we call like a comparative advantage. If I'm looking at the United States and Japan, Japan is very good at producing small, like lawnmower engines, like Honda. We're very good at producing wheat on a large scale. Japan doesn't have a lot of land. So in theory, we would allow Japan, which has a comparative advantage in small engines, to produce those. We will produce the wheat, and we will engage in trade and trade those goods and services. We don't swap it out directly, but we do it through markets. And it is possible for two nations to have an absolute advantage. They can produce with fewer resources both goods, but they can't have a comparative advantage in the production of both goods. And the comparative advantage is what leads to trade. It actually allows us to get outside our production possibility curves. If we're within a closed economy, we would not be able to consume the goods and services that we have today without trade. And this is why organizations such as the General Agreement on Trades and Tariff, the World Trade Organization, try to promote and facilitate trade because they know that makes everybody better off. But there are some trade restrictions that politicians often introduce. Most economists are not in favor of trade restrictions for the most part. But examples could be embargoes, where you simply just don't allow the good to come in. It could be tariffs, which is a direct tax, which impacts the demand for that particular good and service. And sometimes it could just be voluntary trade restrictions that you negotiate with another nation that we only allow you to import so much of those goods or services. But obviously, with international trade, a trade deficit is the difference between exports and imports. In the United States, we definitely import a lot more than we export. It just means that other countries are funding us in the sense that they're buying our treasury bills, notes, and bonds to help us purchase those goods and services. So they have to do something with those U.S. dollars they get, and they reinvest it in the U.S. economy that way. So, all right, well, that's it for this week. But if you do have any questions, do email me. I check email regularly, but I want you to have a great week. And I look forward to your phone post and talking to you online. Take care.